How can a modern day manager not have a mobile phone?
Why should he?
All right, you're welcome along to Thursday's football show. Nathan with you for the next hour. Dan McDonnell is with us. Good evening, Dan.
Evening, Nathan.
We're on the eve of Euro 2020. Part of me was thinking, goddamn COVID, where would we be in the world right now? But actually we would just be right here in Dublin, looking ahead potentially to Slovakia against Poland or something like that. So I'm not sure what I was getting excited about.
Well, if you want to take that point, it would have been over 12 months ago.
Exactly. So we'd just be having a quiet summer.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you want to take that theory all the way you want. But I have to say, as it's got, I wasn't sad about the Euros being taken away. Like, I'm going to Tallaght Stadium tomorrow. There's going to be 1,000 fans there. And I thought it was more important, and I still believe that it was more important to prioritise, getting regular match goers here, back to their sporting habits. I know obviously there's Leinster on tomorrow as well too, and there's other events being rolled out in the coming weeks. I did think that was more important than, say, accommodating people to watch Slovakia and Sweden or whatever.
Could we not have had both?
But as I'm saying, as we get here now, there is a small part of me, all right, that's thinking, you feel a bit detached from this tournament in a way, particularly having covered quite a lot of the recent tournaments, and the idea of having a couple of games here would be pretty cool. You would feel at least in some way you'd be part of it, but it wasn't important enough at the time when the decision was being made, it must be said. We're feeling a little bit more liberated now by everything that's going on. It wasn't an important battle to fight at the time, but obviously it wouldn't be too bad to have a couple of games coming up to go to, I guess, for those who had tickets, and maybe that's a selfish media thing too.
Considering there was so much talk at the time around the venues and could they host games, it now feels as though that's almost been overlooked as part of this European Championship. It's only when you see Wales getting on their flight to Baku you have to remind yourself, actually, this may be a factor during the tournament. A lot of these teams have quite a lot of travelling between matches, which they've never experienced before at a major tournament.
Yeah, and even speaking to a couple of media in the UK and stuff, and I think there's even, not that important, but even with various variants that are sort of, there's concerns at the moment, like they're being a bit stricter in terms of people going from country to country in terms of maybe some media but also support staff, and it just reminds you that there's a precarious aspect to this. You see the Spanish situation at the moment with a few cases and what's going on there. That like it is. I mean, look at it. Ultimately, this is still a mad format, this competition, and really, it's hard to think of anything less suited to a pandemic, than a 11-nation tournament as it is now. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the idea to start with, I wasn't mad in it, but at this moment, it's sort of, there's still a certain madness to it. As much as they've got to the starting line, which I must admit at various times it looked, the idea of it being in one country was being actively spoken about as a real live plan. Someone like Russia would take it on, or even Boris would take it on. So it's sort of remarkable in a way that they've got to where they are. But it just feels like it feels like that there's going to be stories during it of a COVID nature. It almost feels inevitable.
It does feel as though as well that international football is far more affected by the lack of supporters than the club game is. That particularly maybe at that highest level of Premier League, La Liga, Serie A, where there is such a high technical quality of all the players that we now know really that international football isn't the pinnacle. Like, international football isn't where the Champions League is in terms of on the pitch. Off the pitch for supporters, for so many, it still means as much. And international football is that little bit slower at times than club games, and without the crowd there, actually, there's a lot of football on over the next 2 weeks, and I'm very excited about watching it. Maybe I shouldn't be as excited about some of these games as I am.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. I mean, like, I'm still a big lover of international football in terms of there's still a certain authenticity about it without being too, misty-eyed over the whole thing. Because obviously, you can still recruit players and money, still counts. And there's a certain, the strongest will survive to some degree. But there's factors that can't be controlled in the same way that you can't have a Man City or a PSG sort of style jump to prominence within it. And also, I think, listen, your football point is completely correct. I think it's very hard to argue with the fact that that the highest level of football is the group, is the knockout stages of the Champions League. But there is, like, there's a certain prestige that comes with the major tournament. I think particularly, I think the World Cup to me is still above everything else. But even with a Euros, there is, like you saw Ronaldo, for example, at the last one, and what it meant to him, because even at Madrid, he's been in particular, like he would have been surrounded by superstars all the time, and they would buy in something. But the fact that like it meant a lot to him, like personally, as much as anything, working with a team that maybe, now listen, Portugal are still star-studded, but that 2016 team actually wasn't as good as maybe their current one, and that there is something that you have to almost throw these personalities together and just make it work. And what you share in common is where you're from, but sometimes they mightn't share a huge amount more in common. And there's a great sporting challenge in trying to, even trying to guess the teams that we might talk about England and who they're going to play. And there is something about it that I still really enjoy. That the people will complain about international football sometimes, but I think I just think that there can be a certain unpredictable aspect to areas of the major tournament that are great. That there's more romance to it than we will find in the club game now at certain levels. And to go back to your point, or your initial starting point, but definitely you need the colour and the the fans and everything to go with it. Like that is a massive part. And what we have here, and this is still going to be a sort of diluted version of that in this tournament, because obviously a certain number of teams are going to have frenzied home support behind them. Others will not, and they won't have the same volume of, say, travelling fans, that sort of festival vibe that would be created in a regular tournament. So there will be a couple of games that I think will have a slightly surreal, subdued potentially atmosphere. But the contrast to that is you have Scotland at home and Hungary at home, and obviously the Wembley games, and there's quite a few other teams with similar situations where there's going to be an amazing attitude, but almost like NBA style, with sort of like no real away support as such. I think there's going to be some away support in times based on, depending on geographical situations, but not that, not that sort of travel vibe that you would associate with it. So it's going to be a bit different, but I think we'll all get into it. I think we will. Yeah,
I have a feeling we will. We'll come back to the Euros in a minute and look ahead to the opening weekend. We should put the cap on the week for Ireland. It feels as though this week has brought a sense of calm back to the camp, that got the job done, got the win against Andorra. There was an improvement in performance against Hungary. Stephen Kenny learned a lot from the past 2 weeks?
I think so. I would have thought so. I mean, listen, the easy answer is that we'll find out in due course either way, and we might have a different discussion. But I think you're right about the sense of calm. Like, I think it still feels at the moment that almost every Ireland game, there's a massive debate around Stephen Kenny around it. We just can't avoid it. It's like, and you will be in the sort of the epicenter of it, like text messages, feedback, comments, that what comes through. Like every match, it's like it's either a pro Kenny or an anti Kenny, and there's a real that it's just everything is centered around that discussion, and not as much just general discussion about how the team is evolving, without always going back to where the manager stands and that. And listen, from the media perspective, we have to accept some responsibility for that, because we're writing pieces or producing pieces that are very much centered around that. And I think like what that reflects as much as anything is that he still doesn't have the feet under the table yet, in the sense that he doesn't have, you don't have that around Jurgen Klopp after every Liverpool game. You just debate his team and what's going on with them. Like, he doesn't have that credit in the bank.
How does he get past that? Because I got the sense watching those two matches and the fallout and everything around it, that particularly because of the Luxembourg defeat, that the stain of that is going to last a long time. And I'm not sure how he ever gets past that unless results dramatically turn, which is going to be difficult with the group of players that are there at the moment.
Yeah, listen, my view on this, and probably, at the start of the year, my view is I thought he would be fine in terms of having his probably deal extended once he didn't have a Macedonia-style, Cyprus-style defeat. And unfortunately, he's now had that defeat against Luxembourg that is a stick to beat him with. So to almost offset that, I think he probably does need to produce some kind of landmark result in the autumn in some shape or form. In reality, like the campaign is going to end with Ireland not qualifying. I wish that wasn't the case. I desperately wish that wasn't the case. It's very hard to see that not, being a natural conclusion. So I think there's probably two. Sorry, but there's two things that would happen. Like, one is to just get that landmark result somewhere, and that was probably taking points off Portugal, or beating Serbia at home. Or I suppose the other thing is, like, you talk about the fan angle and the stadiums opening up. That if when the stadiums open, when the Aviva hopefully opens up in September, even Azerbaijan game at home, and then there's a Serbia game after that following on quickly. I think in October they play Qatar, and then in November there'll be Portugal in terms of just the home games alone. And if there was a sense, well, actually there's enough people going that are actually buying into this, and you can win a couple of those games, particularly winning the games you should win with a degree of style, well, then maybe that sort of brings a sense of calm too in some way. But you sort of feel like there needs to be a moment, a game that produces a sort of an outpouring of like celebration of something. Because I think there is still I do think that people would watch the other night. Like I've said this, like, I don't think you could watch the game on Tuesday and say, well, this is a team in crisis, like that this is going nowhere. I don't think you could say that. But clearly, to win over as people who will never forget Luxembourg, I think that there is a sense of needing to do something against a stronger team, that really you can make that as a point in the road and say, well, this is a marker for progress, and let's go on from here.
What is his contract situation? Is it up at the end of this campaign? It's simple as that?
Yeah, no, it is. So that's basically the situation. And I do think that people are conscious of it becoming a thing. Like, we don't have too much example of like Irish managers, and we're reflecting on the Delaney era FAI here, where contracts would happen in weird ways at weird times. Where they even signed at all. That was the big thing with Martin O'Neill, wasn't it?
Well, the last European Championship in Versailles, they said he had signed it, but when he was asked had he signed it, he was still waiting to do it.
Yeah, so things were done in a slightly, I don't know if we can talk about FAI contract policy, but so in the Delaney years, I'm not even sure what we can go back to, but I suppose the start of the Delaney years was Brian Kerr's situation, where you had a situation where, and I was only thinking about this the other day, like Brian Kerr played a game against France in September, which was like, I'm sure you remember the game, like, with the sort of the deflected goal, and that was a massive game. A huge game, and Ireland were so close to being. If that game had gone either way, like, Ireland could have qualified for a World Cup. And yet 2 months later, or a month later, he was basically gone. And all that autumn, before every match, the question is, well, are you worried about your contract? Or to every FEI person, what's the story with your contract? And again, this is classic. Like, we will ask those questions and have those debates and discussions. And as much as you would say, well, let's all leave that till November and let's talk about it then, that's not how the news cycle works. That's not how it all pans out. So as a result, I do think that there probably are people in the FEI that would like to have, if he is to be retained, I think would like to have clarity sooner. And I think if results had gone better to this point, I wouldn't have been shocked if they'd extended it, but clearly that they need to see more evidence, and there's been changes at board level, like Packy Bonner's on the board now, independent director, there's another director, Gary Tewig, has come in, so like it's a board decision ultimately, and there's a CEO who's getting his feet under the table as well, Jonathan Hill. So at some stage they're going to have like discussions about this, and I think like the best case for everyone in terms of like stability would be if September went really well, and I think then it might be a situation where, he's in line for discussions about an extension. But I think, to be fair, until that moment happens, it's very likely it could run until November and the end of the campaign, and where you're left having a discussion and a review then.
A lot of the issues that he has faced over the last year are going to remain come September, with players playing time for their clubs. Now, maybe it's not as big an issue on the 1st of September against Portugal, where the league is only back a couple of weeks. The Portuguese players are returning late to pre-season, and everyone's at a similar level of fitness, and they won't have had a huge amount of game time for their clubs anyways. But a lot of these younger players, we don't know where Troy Parrott and Adam Ida are going to be at the start of next season. They may well be in those days trying to get a transfer sorted or a loan move sorted. You were writing today about how he should go about picking that team, and does he need to almost start parking where they are at club level and the league that they're playing in, and pick a team actually that he wants to pick? So pick on what he is seeing in training more than maybe what they're doing with their clubs.
Yeah, I listen. That was what I was writing today, and obviously, listen. Clearly, if someone's not playing at all for their club, well, then that's obviously going to impact your thinking. But I certainly think that, like, I just thought the performance on Tuesday, it was just quite structured in terms of how they played. And while I'm very wary of getting, reading too much into June friendlies, and Hungary are playing, a major tournament in a week's time, and not getting too caught up in it. But I think you have a situation where after 13 games now, like there's obviously patterns emerging. And even listening to Stephen Kenny speaking himself, like, he spoke a big thing last week with the lack of pace, for example, in his ranks, and yet he spoke about someone like Chidozie Ogbene, who's unbelievably quick, and Daryl Horgan, I referenced in the piece today in particular, and Ogbene are both on their way to League One by the looks of it, unless there's moves that come their way in the summer, where Horgan at Wickham and Ogbene at Rotherham. But Daryl Horgan, I think he watched the Ireland games, and every game he's come on or he started in, he seems to make an impact in some way. And like it may be, if you were to list like the top Irish players from 1 to 11, then without trying to put them out in a starting formation, you might find that we are strong in particular areas. Like our goalkeepers at the moment are, we're stacked with them. But there's a real issue with like creativity, and there's a real issue with sort of, I think, pace in terms of the counter, particularly the way he wants to play sometimes. And like these are the areas of the pitch where they've struggled. And there has been times that I think we've seen in the last in the year where, in particular games, he's had Jeff Hendrick playing as the number 10. Now, I think that at times that's because he wanted Hendrick to press on and be aggressive and do a job. But I think, at times they've had reasonable strength in certain areas, but no real innovation or creativity or that sort of change of pace. And I think maybe when it comes to the autumn, like it may well be that you just say, well, Horgan is a player that makes things happen for us. Ogbene can make things happen for us. Maybe someone like Jack Byrne, depending on the situation, he's a creative player, although I'm still not 100% sure if Kenny is 100% on the Jack Byrne express in terms of being a massive fan.
Is that a difficult thing to do, Dan? Is that a difficult thing to do, though, for Stephen Kenny when results have gone the way they are and you need to keep the camp tight, in that including those players means probably not playing Jeff Hendrick, Robbie Brady, senior members, influential members of the squad who, for the harmony of the squad, you probably need to be giving game time to. Like, they are going to be looking at it. If Daryl Horgan is playing League One and they're remaining in the Premier League next season, are going to be looking around thinking, what's going on here?
No, listen, I see your point, but I think it's about balance as well. It just may well be that, like, Hendrick, I think Kenny really likes Robbie Brady and just can't
get him fit.
I think Brady would play him all the time. I think actually Kenny said it in a press conference. He'd play him all the time if he was fine. But I just think it's more a case of, Hendrick, James McCarthy, whatever the situation is, Conor Hourihane. It may well be that they're just going to have to compete for one or two positions, because that's where they're, that's the area of the pitch where they can, they're maybe best suited or can play a role. But actually, particularly if he's going with three if he wants to persist with the three at the back, and then it's like that sort of 3-4-3 or 3-4-1-2. I think the identity of the front three is pretty important. And if you're playing that way, like, you need them to be players who are very efficient in those positions, and that's where they're at their most effective. And I think, like, I'm not saying he hasn't been doing that, but I think at times, like, you kind of wonder, like, there was times across the year where I think he did make references to someone being in League One, and obviously, it's not as good a level as, the Championship and the Premier League, and we'd love to have 11 Premier League players, but I just think it's a case of now, after 13 games, you should be able to see, well, who actually offers something different in this team. It's like they can be the game breakers for Ireland, and they can sort of make things happen. But it's a difficult one because, again, like all the time, if you suddenly have a situation where someone's playing regularly in the Premier League and they're not in the Irish starting team, that would be a stick to beat you with. Like, I made the point in the piece today, like, Kieran Clark is probably going to play. Like, Kieran Clark had a very good season for Newcastle, like one of the few Irish players you could say had a good season. But Darragh O'Shea might well be just better suited to the left of the back three in that role in terms of the skill set that he offers. And he's going to be playing at a lower level next season. But O'Shea's probably a better fit. And I think eventually, at some stage, Stephen Kenny needs a settled side, some kind of settled, structured side. And some people are going to be on the outside of that. that first 11. I mean, I think it was Owen Cowser referenced in a piece today that in 13 games, only 2 players have been available for every squad, for every 13 games. There's been so much chopping and changing. And I think maybe after a training camp for 10 days, 2 weeks, I just thought they looked a little bit more sure of themselves in where they stand. And I think that has to be some kind of template going forward into the autumn.
Yeah, it does look as though they are still together as a group. Now, I say that we're in a position where you don't get to see the players. You can't make massive judgments on them as they walk past you and ignore you in the mix zone as to what that means for the mood within the camp, and are they unhappy about not playing in a game. I did think from the off that Kenny was fortunate that he had senior players like Seamus Coleman, James McLean, Shane Duffy, and I put this to him in the press conference. They do seem like the perfect people for him in this position to have as the senior internationals. Like Coleman going out there as captain despite being injured, saying I'm going to go to that training camp, maybe even just to keep a lid on everything, that if there was any questions and frustrations within the squad, it's not really the sort of thing Seamus Coleman gets on board with. And it's been a big boost for Kenny in a way, publicly anyways, that nothing's been coming out of the squad.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, listen, obviously we had November and everything that went on around the Wembley game, the video, and certainly like there was some stuff going, and I don't even want to go down this road again, but there was like some stuff that was, I suppose, reported around that time, or suggestions being put out that time, putting, sort of affixing opinions to senior players that I don't think corresponded with the feelings of those players. And certainly that seems to have things seem to have tightened up maybe since then. It seems like things have been a bit more stable. I think Anthony Barry's been a very popular appointment as a coach, it would appear, and certainly there seems to have been, there doesn't seem to be sort of negative reports standing out there. Like, even Shane Duffy speaking the other night, I think there's been an attempt at times to suggest that Kenny's dropping of Shane Duffy was some kind of an affront to Shane Duffy, or that this was a potential thing. And Duffy has made it perfectly clear that he's been in contact with Kenny all along, and he completely understands. He was almost grateful that he picked him for any game rather than being having his nose put out of joint that he was dropped for one. So I think certainly, as you mentioned, Coleman came out to do his bit, even though he was never going to play in Hungary apparently. And Duffy, James McLean, they are like probably the core senior members of this group now. There'll be a couple of others who haven't been there. I suppose Randall's been around for a while, and I suppose Hendrick and Robbie Brady, as you mentioned, like James McCarthy. But I mean, a lot of them, like some of them, haven't been around for injuries and various reasons. So I think I think the influential voices in the dressing room do seem to be on the same hymn sheet at the moment, and they're on board. And I think, like, again, sometimes how we talk about this, we always talk about it as though, and this is possibly an issue, that we are always talking about as though that Kenny has to win the players over. This has always been a thing from the start. He always has to win them over. And it's even like, we're talking about players backing him, and that even is part of the feet not being under the table fully line of discussion, that we're in that zone a small bit still. But there does seem to be no sense of like massive discord, I think that's probably why it was good to have a camp away, for 10 days with no COVID issues and the tight bubbles, like, because that stuff was draining for people. You've had people on the show talking about it. I've had discussions with people, like, it was the camps weren't enjoyable, like there was just too much going on, and when you're coming away to play for Ireland and you're in a hotel as it is and away from families and all of that, like it can be difficult enough. Like, people always talk about the Irish camp being enjoyable, but it wasn't enjoyable for people.
No,
and
no trips to Gibney's anymore.
No, all that stuff is gone, and I think Kenny spoke about trying to. Like, I think that a few games of golf when they were away, or players could do whatever they wanted, just to try and normalise things a small bit. And even like the whole backroom staff was changed, which is another thing that is contentious in a way. But there's a lot of people there just they wouldn't have known each other, and that has been another part of the transition process that goes beyond the football stuff that we see.
Yeah, like any workplace, a good working night out can settle a lot of differences very quickly, for good or bad, I guess.
Yeah.
All our football and off the ball is with Paddy Power's Save Our Game, donating £10,000 to Irish football for every goal England score at the Euros. For information on responsible gambling, visit gamblingcare.ie. So how many goals will England score is the question. I'll contradict myself on England, Dan, in that I think England are in a far stronger position than they were a year ago in terms of the talent available to Gareth Southgate, but I was more confident a year ago of them doing something because he seemed to know what his starting 11 was. He would have had Kane, Rashford, Sterling all playing real good football at that stage. Henderson was fit. They seemed to have an 11 in mind for the game, whereas now he has so many options. It seems remarkable he's going into a huge game, a repeat of a World Cup semi-final at the weekend against Croatia, and there's maybe 8-9 positions where it's still up for debate who he's going to pick.
Yeah, and like interesting reading some of the press stuff in England this week, and like some reporters to be well enough sourced. With Mike McGrath, I think it was in the Telegraph, talking about sort of options they were looking at for the Croatia game, and I think obviously the Harry Maguire thing is very key to them defence. I know the attacking stuff is more interesting, but even just in terms of the defence, that they're on about maybe playing Luke Shaw in a back three, and just all sorts of permutations and combinations that they're talking about.
So they're talking about playing Kyle Walker, John Stones, and Luke Shaw as a back three potentially.
Yeah, that was it.
With then two more full backs, Chilwell and
James or Trippier. I think that was the thing at the right side, and then it was going to be Rice and I'm trying to think, was it Rice and Phillips or Rice and Mason Mount? Or I think there's definitely a lot of permutations and discussion. Then the front three is the big debate. But obviously, if you change the system, then it might change like what you decide to do with the shape of your front three, in some shape or form. So as you say, there's just a lot going on with the selection conundrum, and all their coverage over there is very much like everyone, readers like send in your 11, or our pundits picked our 11, and there's normally I'm sure we've had it at times going to tournaments where there's one or two positions that you're debating, but this is like entire teams, that actually, I think people know Harry Kane will play, and people know Declan Rice will play, and
Stones and Pickford, and that's probably about it.
Stones and Pickford, yeah, basically. You'd imagine Walker will play in some in whatever system they play, you would think, but actually that's not even guaranteed with how good some of the other options are. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird one. And the thing about England's tournament is, and this is the thing, you can talk about the competition, just look at who's the best team, but obviously you have to look at the permutations and the routes.
Well, they benefited in 2018 massively from being on the right side of the draw, where suddenly they found themselves in a position where an unexpected team, Croatia as it was, ended up in the final. This time round, it looks as though they're on the wrong side, and there's a big opportunity then for, we were talking earlier, you said Turkey, I'm saying Denmark, Austria, a team like that to go deep into this competition, maybe without having to beat one of the better teams. Oh,
definitely. The teams that are in Group A and Group B, the teams that we'll see out earlier, have a very interesting opportunity, and even if a team like Italy didn't win their group, for example, it wouldn't be a disaster for them at all to be a runner-up in their group, because they potentially, there's a passage there, and as you say, the underdog options, you definitely be looking at Groups A and B, and you can take your pick on who you think is the improver, whether it's Turkey, as you mentioned, or Denmark. But whereas England's situation is basically, barring Hungary, turning out to be a real surprise package. England are going to be playing, even if they win their group, which is they're going to be playing a heavyweight team in the round of 16, and if they don't win their group and they come second, I think they could play Spain, can't they? So it's I think for a team that's trying to find its way in the competition with its uncertainty, there's just that slight concern from their perspective that this tournament, before they're getting their rhythm, they could be gone from it. That's it before they find, because the thing about 2018, and from covering a lot of it, they sort of knew what they were, and yes, you're right that the group, the pathway was favourable, but they had a degree of structure within their setup that they hit on it in the tournament, and it worked. I don't know, but they do have the home support as well, and that sort of Euro 96 vibe, and you never know, it could just ignite for them in another way, and there's no turning back.
Yeah. We'll have any amount of coverage coming up and off the ball over the coming days and weeks. Euro 2020 show every day live at 11 a.m. with Shane Hannon. Clive Allen is going to be his guest on tomorrow's show. Dan, you're going to be back, I think, at the weekend on Saturday with John, looking ahead to the tournament, a bit more of a preview there. And obviously you'll have something to talk about then with Italy playing Turkey tomorrow night. Thanks as always, Dan. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Nathan.
After the break, well, I mentioned the Euro 2020 show. We had our first one earlier today. You can watch back the full thing right now on youtube.com/off the ball, or download the podcast on the OTB Sports app. For their debut show, Shane Hannon was joined by Damien Delaney and Will O'Callaghan. They went through all the groups trying to figure out who would advance to the knockout stages. Here is Damien. Are we going to have Damien now, or are we going to take a break? I think we're going to take a break first and then we'll hear from Damien Delaney.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power's Save Our Game. Donating at least 100,000 to Irish football via England goals this summer. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power's Save Our Game. Donating 10k to Irish football for every goal England scored the Euros. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.
All right, welcome back. It's Thursday's football show. Nathan with you this evening. We've just heard from Dan McDonnell, putting a bit of a wrap on the week from a Republic of Ireland point of view, and also talking about England and the many question marks over their starting 11. Our Euro 2020 show is on every single day, 11 a.m. Shane Hannon is in the hot seat. They will bring you through all the day's games. Some brilliant analysis in there. They'll have Damien Delaney and Eamon Dunphy as regular pundits. The first show was on this morning. You can watch the full thing back right now on youtube.com/off the ball. Or the easiest thing to get all our football coverage over the Euros is to get onto the OTB Sports app and subscribe to our football podcasts. Then you'll get them as they happen. Earlier today then, Damien Delaney, Will O'Callaghan, Shane Hannon were picking through the groups. They were figuring out who was going to advance to the knockout stages. Here's Damien Delaney on his dark horses for the tournament.
Who are you going for, Damien, in terms of the winners of this tournament ultimately, and maybe a dark horse team that can strike a bit of a run together?
Well, funny enough, I just came in when Will was asked for his dark horse, and nearly fell off the chair when he picked Italy as a dark horse, a team that's won 20 in a row. I think they have to be front and centre of the favourites talk. I thought dark horses were somebody that kind of... I mean, my dark horse was going to be not for the tournament, but have a really good run and potentially get really far. Is Denmark, when you look at the way their group is set up. They're obviously going to finish second in their group. When you texted me last night picking dark horses, I was looking for dark horses. So I kind of was looking through the groups, and if they finish second, they will not play a superpower until they get to the semi-final. And I think that we've seen an awful lot of Denmark, obviously ourselves, over the last number of years. I think they're a good side. They're capable. They're defensively solid. They have got some goals in them. They've got a very good goalkeeper. And I think that they might get on a run to the semi-finals and kind of calling on the spirit of 1992, am I right in saying, Shane, is it? Yeah. So it might get to the semi-finals, and then you never know. You know, then you're obviously going to come against a superpower in the semi-finals, and they could get lucky on a one-off game, and then you never know. So I would cautiously say Denmark, but probably if you're kind of on the same lines as you guys, I'd probably pick Belgium then. That's my dark horse.
Pick France as your dark horse. Do a similar thing to Will. No, it's a fair point. And like Will was mentioning earlier, the fact that, you know, it's a 24-team tournament. I think it's only the second Euros that have had 24 teams. Some might say the quality could get a bit diluted by adding more teams in. But do you think the quality heading into this one, Damien, is fairly high considering the teams involved?
It is, but what I noticed, I think, in the last World Cup is the first week of the tournament was, you know, a couple of good group games, but there was an awful lot of games where you could argue the point that some of those teams shouldn't have been at the Euros. You know, when the Euros is kind of 18 teams, you get good games from the get-go. And obviously with 3 teams getting out of a group, certain groups, you might end up with some teams that really shouldn't be in the knockout stages of a European Championship. If you're a purist thinking of that back to Jack Charlton's time when it was a 16-team tournament. I think at one point it was even a 12-team tournament. So, that's when you get good games and the elite are playing each other very, very early. But look, UEFA have obviously extended it or expanded the tournament to include an awful lot of teams like North Macedonia and teams like this are now in there. So, it's good, but I think the tournament, it won't be a case if we sit down and watch every game. Because when I was growing up, you sat down and you watched every game. I think you look at the fixture list and you will pick and choose a couple of games that you won't probably.
No, you'll watch all of them. Go on.
I probably won't. Some of them there, I was thinking I'll give them ones a miss.
The fact that there's finally and thankfully fans, like I know Wembley, I think it's maybe 22,000 around. Baku and St Petersburg can host around 30,000 fans in fact for their games, and I know Budapest as well is something along those lines. But in terms of the number of fans being at matches, that's going to change the atmosphere drastically. Do you think it puts more pressure on the likes of England playing at Wembley in front of their fans, or is it an obvious advantage?
Oh, it's a huge advantage. I mean, especially England getting home games in the Euros, if you were playing against England in an empty stadium, it's been said many times that it almost levels the playing field, that, empty stadium's an empty stadium. But England fans, just, even when you're driving up Wembley Way as the away team, you're going to see an ocean of St George's crosses and fans, and you're going into a hostile environment. And even though it won't be a full house, you'll still have some sort of intimidation factor. And England will obviously get a boost from it as well, having their own fans cheering, because, regardless of what you think, England fans do get behind their team. They really, really do. And the party atmosphere will be going, as all countries will, actually, not just England. That's what I'm trying to say, is that, there is a good party spirit and a good feel-good factor. And I suppose when you look back at Euro 96 and what it did for England then, they'll be hoping for something similar. In
terms of the Golden Boot, we'll take a run through the groups in just a moment, but Golden Boot wise, like a stat that jumped out at me in research for the Euros was 9 players at this tournament have more international goals than Harry Kane, which kind of shows the quality of goal scorers that we have on offer. And if you look at the favourites at the moment, Romelu Lukaku and Harry Kane are pretty much neck and neck. You've Kylian Mbappe, and then Ronaldo, Memphis Depay, Karim Benzema. Who are you backing for top goal scorer this tournament? It could be anyone. You need a deep run in the tournament, and you probably need, I guess, a few handy-ish games in the group stages.
Yeah.
Go on, Will, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it all depends, Shane, as well, when it comes to the tournament, that we've seen this happen at both World Cup and Euros, where one team might hand out an absolute spanking to somebody in the group stages, and someone scores 3 or 4 goals and puts themselves right in line to win the Golden Boot, even if they don't play that deep into the tournament. So you always have to consider that, like the potential, say, mismatches along the way. And you could see someone like, Lewandowski, who is in such remarkable form at the moment. If, say, Poland score a lot of goals in one game, it mightn't matter if Poland don't get to a semi-final. Like, if you're backing Harry Kane, you're probably backing Harry Kane with the assumption that England go all the way to the last 4 of the tournament. And similarly, if you're going, say, for Kylian Mbappe or Karim Benzema, the value on that is that you would expect that France are going to go right deep into the tournament. Similarly with Romelu Lukaku. So, understandable, you'd have to pick those players as favourites, but I would give a slight warning about if you're going to go for, say, Cristiano Ronaldo or for Mbappe, that their group is extremely difficult and they're going to face a couple of very tough games in the group. So there is that possibility that those games might just be won by the odd goal. Don't know what you're thinking about that, Damien.
Yeah, I fully take your point, and there's something's ringing a bell there when you said the point you made about going deep in the tournament with Harry Kane in 2018. If someone can find that stat, I think he scored all his goals in the group and he kind of limped to the Golden Boot, I think, in the World Cup. So that's a very valid point. I'm going to go with Ciro Immobile for top
left
scorer.
field.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
16-1.
Yeah, I think he's 20 goals. He's a serious finisher. The way Italy are set up, I think he will score goals almost certainly. I think that's my left field one, I suppose. But I obviously have to speak with Lukaku as well. He's done really, really well. Had a great season. So I think if I was going for a top scorer, I would go Immobile or Lukaku.
Interesting shouts, very interesting shouts. Mark Lawrenson went with Antoine Griezmann when he was speaking to myself and Owen on OTB AM the morning. Another left field shout. Lads, let's take a run through the groups then. We'll start with Group A. Italy, Switzerland, Turkey and Wales. So I guess Italy, I know, Will, you're big behind the Mancini has only tasted defeat twice in his 28 games in charge of Italy. Damien making the point that they're on that 25-game unbeaten run. They're in serious form, and the strength and depth as well they have in that squad. Won all of their qualifying games. So, Will, make the case for Italy?
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they don't top that group. I mean, Turkey is probably the most difficult game that they're going to face, and that comes first up. So it's a key first night in Rome for them. They've got a couple of home fixtures, which helps them in terms of getting out of the group too. And I don't know, I kind of get the feeling that Wales are very unlikely to repeat, lads, what they did back in 2016 when they seem to be in a much better place going to it. And that's even quite aside from not having their manager because of his legal issues currently. Like, Wales have definitely dropped down a bit. We've got to see so much of them through the last two campaigns between the Nations League and being in our World Cup group too. And I just think, for me, Italy and Turkey are the teams who are going to qualify. And I'm not expecting Wales to actually throw an upset up this time around. I would imagine Italy first, Turkey second.
Like, when you look at that group, like, I've made the case for Turkey, and I do think they will go deep into this tournament. But Switzerland, travelling wise in the group stages, they're the most travelled team, so 7,740 miles. The first game is in Baku against Wales, then they fly to Rome to take on Italy, and back to Baku to play Turkey. They're a decent team, the Swiss, last 16 in the last Euros. They also in the last 16 in the World Cup in Russia in 2018. They have a few defensive uncertainties, possibly, the Swiss team, but they're still a decent squad. Granit Xhaka, Xherdan Shaqiri among them. And then kind of Wales, Damien, like 2016 was the summer of their lives over in Wales. I mean, they had 8 tournaments between 1960 and 2014 that they missed out on by one single game. So they've had plenty of heartbreak over the years. But do you think lightning can strike twice? Can Wales do it again as they did in 2016?
I don't think so. I think they'll go as far as what they did to the semi-final. As you pointed out there, they were in a really good place going into that tournament. Everything was really, really solid. They were playing a great brand of football, and they seem to be on a real high. They're still a decent side. I think Italy will mosey on out of that group fairly unblemished. And then I do think it's a good scrap for second between all three of them. Trying to call or predict who will come out of that is those games are going to be really, really tight. I mean, it could even be a goal difference one that gets you second in that group. And I think all three of them are capable of. As you said, Switzerland are, really, really good side, solid enough. It's Turkey also, and Wales. So it's too tight to call for me, that one. But Italy, I think, will mosey on out of that. I could envisage a situation where they kind of have the group wrapped up with a game to spare and maybe get to rest some players, and similar to what we did in 2016, someone could beat them and then sneak out of the group. So something along those lines is what I would think for that group. You look at Gareth Bale, Damien, and like I know he only scored 2 goals, I think, in qualifying, but fairly recent hat-trick in the Premier League for Tottenham, and he's nearing 32 years of age. He's often prioritised Wales. Certainly when he was at Real Madrid, he prioritised Wales and golf. But this could well be his last major tournament for Wales unless they make the next World Cup. But how big a tournament is this for him to kind of lead the line, to show the way, and to prove that 2016 wasn't a one-off? I think it is, and I'm not sure he would see it that way. He seems like a pretty laid-back fella who just kind of saunters around, but he's well rested going into this tournament. He had a large portion of maybe 3/4 of the season off, and then really only came into the team the back end, which means he's probably not going in with any fatigue issues or any confidence issues, because he finished the season brilliantly, and he does love playing for Wales. I wouldn't say it would be his last tournament. If I saw him in Qatar next year, which is only a year away, wouldn't at all be surprised. And if I saw him playing for Wales at 35, 36 years of age, I would be surprised either, because I think he is the type of guy that would just show up for Wales, even if he was playing at any level, really, So big tournament for him. He's a type of personality that if he just gets in the mood early, he really could rip this tournament up. He always has that in the locker, but unfortunately you just don't know motivation-wise where he's at and whether he's dialed in. But if he wakes up on the right side of the bed, he could really have a good tournament. Yeah, that's a pretty tough group to call, to be fair, Group A. So Italy, Switzerland, Turkey and Wales in Group A.
I keep saying Damien Delaney is one of the best analysts around, but then he says if he wakes up on the right side of the bed, he could have an impact. That's what he's putting it down to. You can get more of that good stuff with Shane Hannon every single weekday, 11 a.m. It is the Euro 2020 show here on Off the Ball. They've got some brilliant guests lined up. Damien Delaney is going to be a regular. Eamon Dunphy is going to be a regular guest as well. And tomorrow, they're going to be talking to Clive Allen ahead of the start of the tournament, getting his thoughts on England's attacking options. So that is 11 a.m. You can get the podcast right afterwards. It's live on all our social channels, but make sure to check that out.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Paddy Power's Save Our Game. Donating 10k to Irish football for every goal England score at the Euros. Gamble responsibly. Gamblingcare.ie.